Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. In today's episode, we have a special guest star. We have Nik Molnar, previously of Glimpse fame and now of many other sorts of fame. Nik, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be with you all virtually.
Sound tentative about that, I understand.
Well, I want to make it clear that everybody knows that we're not together. We're not like in four
Right.
corners of the same room. We're being responsible adults.
You
It
can
would
tell
be
from
a
our
very strange room to have
would
like
be,
these different backgrounds.
It could be virtual backgrounds.
It could be.
Yeah,
don't-
actually,
don't
maybe
talk
that's
about
looks
like a
like a
thing you
virtual
could.
background.
Yeah.
Nik, it's good to see you. It's been a while since we've been able to connect, but we're kind of doing a recap here. We've been doing the show for about 4 years. We're coming up on 200 episodes. And we kind of reflected back and said, hey, who are some people who were really part of, not necessarily our day-to-day stuff, but just really part of our journey, who influencers and not just on projects that we're working on, but on the community at large. And you were obviously one of the first names that came up. We actually met. I think you probably remember because you've got like an insanely good memory. But we met back at Mix 11 down in Vegas, and we were both pimping open source projects down at Open Source Fest, and you had a little thing called Glimpse. It kind of caught on, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. Hindsight is one of these things where it felt huge at the time, and now I kind of feel like, oh, that was a fun little ride. But yes, Anthony, who built Glimpse with me, and I were kind of in the right place at the right time, and kind of the curve of .NET really kind of picking up and embracing open source as a development model and embracing the open source community. And so I don't remember now. I can't believe it's been almost 10 years since we met.
Wow.
But I want to say that Glimpse was one of the first 10 non-Microsoft authored NuGet packages in the gallery. So like
Wow.
we were there at the right moment. I think we built something that was obviously useful. We scratched our own itches, but yeah, it was very exciting to kind of get to work with Scott Hanselman and things like that, and go on various different podcasts like this one, which, by the way, congratulations on 200. That's phenomenal.
Thank you.
So for people who haven't ever seen Glimpse or are new enough to the Microsoft stack that they maybe haven't seen it yet, what was Glimpse? What is Glimpse? I mean, is Glimpse still around?
It's open source, so I'm sure there are people out there using it still. Anthony and I, the main co-founders, we have not been involved in it for several years now. We kind of stepped away when other kind of duties. We have children now. We're both married now. Like we got a bunch of stuff going on, so it's just not really our focus. The code is still out there on GitHub. I know that there are people who still use it every once in a while. We'll get a issue or a bug that pops up that we just let the community kind of handle if that happens.
Nice.
So let's talk about what it was. This is a celebration of life. Glimpse was a debugging and diagnostics tool for Asp.Net. We used to talk about it as like F12 because that was kind of what we would talk about as the debugging tools, right, that are built into the browser, right? You hit F12 and it pops up that panel at the bottom of the screen. And the tools that are built into the browser help you with client-side concerns, right? They show you your JavaScript, your CSS, your HTML, maybe some of the networking and things like that. And so what Glimpse was the same concept. You would make a gesture on the web page and it would pop up a very similar panel, but it would show you all of the server-side concerns. So we tied in with Asp.Net specifically, and we would show, what route was selected, which ones failed, why they failed, what database queries were executed for that one request that you just made to the server, those kinds of things. I think, ASP.NET MVC was still a fairly new paradigm. It was quite a big shift from web forms to MVC. So when we built it, it was another one of those right place at the right time. It was a lot of people were starting to get closer to the raw metal of the web. They were looking at things like HTTP, and raw HTML and JavaScript a little bit more closely than they had, at least in the ASP.NET community. And so it was kind of tooling to help make sure that they were successful and understood what was happening in their apps.
Yeah, I love that you call it like you guys, I think you kind of alluded to it earlier, but it was the F12 for the server, right? It was the idea. And I know that especially, early on in the MVC world, things like routing that were like so hard to debug, like some of those concepts or whatever. And when you were first coming into it and it's like, okay, here's an entire new paradigm and you don't know anything about it and you have no way to debug it, and the error messages or the absurd behaviors that you might not yet understand, there's no way to really start to grok what that meant. And so that's where that tool really, like I was using it on every project that we were doing MVC on at the time. So yeah.
Yeah, I
it's
remember
awesome, really great things. Yeah.
I remember turning that tool on like almost every project that I got involved in, and the other developers just having that moment of like, oh, that's what's happening on the server. It like explained everything for them basically. It was really cool that way.
It's funny because it came from a place where, so at the time I was working for a consultancy in New York City, and I was kind of in charge of training a bunch of the developers who were focused on web about MVC. Right? And so I had multiple PowerPoint decks, and we'd go do these 1 day long boot camps where I would explain things, and I just felt like I was saying the same things over and over again, and I was asking how could we scale that instead of using English to explain what's happening on the server. Can I write some code that would explain it? And so really it was kind of this tool to enable and to educate, and it just so happened to kind of get packaged up the way that it did.
And then it grew because you guys, before you guys left the team, it really started to spread into other domains as well. It wasn't just limited to ASP.NET, right?
Yeah, so what ended up happening is a bit of a wild ride, maybe, one that I'm very glad that I got to be a part of. We ended up getting sponsored not once but twice by different companies. So there's a company in England called RedGate Software. They're mostly known for like their DBA tools. So they had sponsored us for about 3 years to really kind of mature the product, bring it past just kind of like a, hey, we slung some code up on GitHub kind of a thing. They were fantastic to us. That was great. When we were with them, we started to expand beyond MVC into web forms, things like that. And then really like establish our extension model, because that was the thing. You could build plugins. There were about 100 third-party plugins for Glimpse at its peak.
That's awesome.
And then when we ended up going over to Microsoft, under Microsoft, we had a team working on it. I want to say it was about 18 months. And during that time, we built a version of it for Node.js that kind of went into a limited beta before we ended up kind of spinning down the efforts and moving on to some other projects.
Now, RedGate and Microsoft are not sponsors of the ASP.NET Monsters, but if anybody's watching,
but if they want to mash that,
let's mash on that. Right on. Okay, so
walked by the RedGate offices because they're in Cambridge, I think.
They are in Cambridge, yes.
Yeah.
And then from there, you transitioned, and I know, like I think the last time we saw each other was at Confu in Montreal, and you were already talking about more meta performance level things in terms of diving in and really kind of appreciating the wider scope of what's happening, and that was more client side directed. So where did your journeys go after those days?
Yeah, so Glimpse really took me down this path of really kind of focusing in on performance. What we found is like once people roughly understood logically how their apps were working, the next thing was, oh, well, now I want to make them fast. So Glimpse kind of became like this really lightweight query analyzer and profiler. One of our most popular plugins was one that we built that was this timeline view that would literally show you the Gantt chart of here's how long each action took and action result took that maybe you had plugged into your pipeline and things like that. And so once we got there, and part of my gig at RedGate was to be in developer relations. And so I didn't just go out and shill Glimpse. Instead, what we did is we went out and we talked about how to solve the problems that Glimpse would expose. So plug this thing in, it's going to show you have this problem. Here's some strategies for how to fix that. And we did that for the whole web stack from the back end to the front end. And so really I was kind of focused on performance and learning about performance and educating about performance while I was there. And that kind of parlayed me to the point where I was at Microsoft when we decided to spin down Glimpse. I was really entrenched into that space. And so I ended up transferring over to the App Insights team. And I worked there for nearly 2 years, kind of working in the same space. I got very involved in distributed tracing and putting together a spec to help people kind of debug and trace across, microservices or end-tier applications.
So interestingly enough, we transitioned from Glimpse, which we all used on all of our projects, and now we're talking App Insights, which we all use on all of our projects. so Nick, we're obviously some of the stuff that happened over App Insights. Like, I mean, there were immediate benefits even in the early days of App Insights. When did it really start to get exciting for you over there?
So I can't really take credit for App Insights. It was a well-established project when I kind of joined on board.
You can take credit for it. We're fine with that.
We won't stop you.
No.
As long as Shiva or Hong aren't listening, those are my old managers over there. Then yeah, I built App Insights. It was it was like 4 or 5 hours of one Friday night. No, it was a long night. No, what was exciting to me there was the level of kind of community and thinking about kind of this problem space from an kind of more of an industry level, right? So I was very fortunate while we were there to get to lead the partnership between Microsoft and Google to form a project that at that time was called Open Census, now known as Open Telemetry, which is kind of one of the premier set of libraries that people use to gather their telemetry data going forward, and App Insights supports. I was also fortunate enough to become a member of the W3C. I was the co-chair of a working group on distributed tracing, which I can tell you guys, because y'all are like me, we're nerds, right? It's like, how cool is that? Like to be there in the room where like Tim Berners-Lee was and things like that. It's super nerdy. I can't tell any of my friends. They're like, yeah, who cares? You went to a conference. I'm like, no, I went to a super nerd conference. So that was the kind of stuff that I was really proud to kind of accomplish. Like some of these things that are having impacts, of course, with App Insights on Microsoft, but even beyond, I was very honored to be able to be a part of some of those things.
It's funny how you talk about that and like talk about being super nerds and then bring up Tim Berners-Lee. Simon literally just dropped that name in a channel 21 minutes ago. So we're vibing here. We're feeling you, Nick. Awesome. Okay, so it's cool. We talk about the impact of some of these things. You how do you keep grounded then as a super nerd who contributed to a code base that is, literally used by millions of people and tens of millions of websites daily? Like that's not an insane thing. That's like the guy who invented putting peanuts in chocolate bars. It's like, what?
Yeah, Milton Hershey. He named a town after himself, so I don't know if he's like the best example of staying grounded.
Wait, is that demonstrably true? Like, was it actually Hershey that came up with that?
Let's go with it.
Yeah. Again, we don't fact check here, so.
Yeah. It was Milton Hershey, and then he was kissing his wife one day, and
I just don't know that I feel comfortable with having an American invent something chocolatey.
Oh, well, he certainly didn't invent chocolate.
Yeah, but I don't want Americans to take credit for like chocolate and nuts together. We're going to research this.
Are you trying to like plant the Canadian flag on chocolate? You have maple syrup.
I don't think it's like a Canadian thing either. I would just hope that it would be like a Swiss thing or
Belgium or something.
Yeah, something like that.
I actually think it's a Mexican thing.
Maybe.
Right? Like the Aztecs.
Yeah, but they didn't have chocolate bars in the same way. It was more like a cacao drink kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good for us to stay on topic, though.
These are the real hard-hitting issues.
We'll put a Wikipedia link in the show notes for anyone interested.
My quick research here says it's Harry Burnett Reese of the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup Company.
Oh, interesting. I love his pieces.
And so, anyways, on to humility.
I'm very humble. I'll tell you all about how humble I am.
I'm one of the most humble people I know.
Yeah, exactly. Staying grounded, it's an interesting question. It kind of, it's a good question. So kudos to you for being the boss and asking such a question. That was a reference to your mug for people who stopped looking at James.
Well, it does say my wife said I could be. So there's
some humor built into your coffee. That's good. Yeah, it's an interesting question because I don't really ever feel like I don't know, maybe my family keeps me grounded. It's funny, like we talk in this circle, right? And the four of us, and we're all these old developer guys who can think about what we were doing 10 years ago, but like I don't have a single person in my meat space life who gives a rip about what I do. or understands what I do. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, I'm a husband, I'm a father. Though I'm a person who's trying to be a better citizen. Those are the things that I'm really kind of focused on, and the work has been a blessing and a joy, right? But it's not something I try to get too caught up on. The other thing I'll say is, at some point in RedGate, there was starting to be a transition where I became less of a developer. I spent 20 years day in and day out writing code and become more of a product person, right? Product manager or program manager, like they call it at Microsoft. And so that is a very humbling position because you just hear all the things that are wrong with what you're working on all day long, right? And so you always know there's more. You always know how it could be better. You're always thinking, well, in 6 months, how are we going to go capture this use case or that customer? And so that's exciting because you're always thinking about what's next and how to make things better. But it also means that you kind of live in oh, this thing sucks. That's broken. I wish it did that. That's the kind of feedback that you're hearing.
One of my identity check moments was between there was a period of time where we had moved cities and I had a contract that hadn't started yet, and one of my buddies he lays carpet for a living, and he's like, well, hey, why don't you come work with me for a little bit? And we would literally go in and we'd take somebody's furniture out of the room, we'd pull out the old carpet, we'd put the new carpet back down, we'd move the back in. It was this one of the first jobs we did together, this lady came back in and she started crying. She was just like, oh my gosh, you guys have transformed my space. And it was like, it felt like such a simple thing, but at the same time, she saw the work happen and she understood the work and she loved the result. And that was something that I so rarely feel in software. And I had a whole new respect for anybody who works in trades. Like it was definitely, a new way to look at things.
Yeah. I mean, I would have to say, like, the thing that I'm most proud of during all of this time that we've been talking about is the relationships, right? Like the fact that James, we have literally been in the same room maybe 8 times,
maybe
over a decade.
Together. Yeah, over a decade. Yeah,
over a decade, right? But I feel like every time I talk to you or any of you guys, right, it's picking up an old hat. It's kindred spirits, right? Like some of my best friends are people that I randomly met on Twitter or doing open source, right? I think of another Canadian, Daryl Miller up in Montreal, right? Like,
love Daryl.
Yeah, him and his family came and visited us right before COVID started. There are these people, like some of those relationships are the things that I cherish the most. And I know we're getting a little sappy and touchy-feely, but it's Thanksgiving next week in the U.S. and so I'm being reflective and thinking about it.
I do, one thing about Daryl, I did wish that he had a stronger opinion about things because he's a very reserved guy. So
he just needs to do a little bit more research just so he can
be
a little bit more crisp about his thoughts.
Okay, so our last guest that we actually talked to was Andrew Stanton Nurse, and he did this beautiful segue. So we can go right into Codespaces, because he actually said this is one of the things that he's excited about down the road moving forward. And we're like, perfect. We've got Nik actually coming on, and he's like, oh, talk to Nik.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So lead us into this. Expand our minds. Tell us about Codespaces.
Well, here's a little callback to the last episode. So Andrew was working on NuGet when we released Glimpse, and so we were picking his brain all the time, trying to get suggestions for features to add into NuGet and stuff like that. That was a cool partnership. So Codespaces. Do you want to? I guess maybe we should set up the audience for what it is first.
Yeah. Let's do that.
So Codespaces is a GitHub service. It's a compute-oriented service made for and by developers. So, I think the best way to understand it is to see it, and I'll pull up a link for the last demo that I did, which was at Build 2020. But basically, you walk up to a repo. There's a giant button that says code. You hit that button, and within about 30 seconds, in your browser, you have VSCode running with all of the compute and storage and networking and everything that you need configured for that repo. So you've walked up to a Python repo, you hit code. We're going to make sure that we install everything that you need to run Python. I have an example application that I call Ballpark Tracker, where I keep track of all of the different ballparks that I visited as a huge baseball fan, right? And that's got Node, and it's got Mongo, and the database spins up. Everything is just there in about 30 seconds, which means anybody who wants to go and work on that application, they just have to hit the button. They don't have to worry about downloading everything, reconfiguring their machine, setting up their dev environments. I literally
sounds like magic.
It is magical. Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to some of my core philosophies with what I'm trying to do with my career, right? Like helping developers, educate developers, and making them more productive, right? The reason why Glimpse was built, the reason why I worked on F12, and now this is the amount of time that we spend setting up dev environments. And it's not just like, oh, when you get hired to a new company, you set it up, right? But how many times have you been like, oh, I could fix this bug on this open source project, and then you don't, because you're like, oh, like I got to go install this version of that, and then okay, it's taking me an hour to get set up, right? That goes away now, right? You just go in and do it, and it's gonna take you 30 seconds. Or inner source, right? As more and more large organizations do inner source, which we do a lot at Microsoft, I found myself popping in and out of all different code bases and never quite knowing what I needed to do to get things up and running. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about Codespaces. I've been working on it now for almost 2 years.
And you're right. I was just gonna say, it really strikes a note. Sorry to interrupt, Simon. It really strikes a note in terms of like one of the first things we do getting onto a project tends to be that initial step of, okay, let's like when you're doing like a rescue on a project, like you're going in to help a team or whatever, the first thing you do is you're like, okay, how do we get this thing building? And you put some docs together to try and get, because it's like a 6-hour ramp up to get the project going. Sorry, I cut you off, Simon.
No, I was going to say that it does away with that whole like onboarding document that you had to have. It tells people exactly what to install, and now it's all kind of digitized instead. So I remember a couple of years ago, there was a bunch of extensions that were released for Visual Studio Code that let you do kind of remote development against Docker containers and against other targets. And part of that, I think, was splitting out like the front and back end so that you ended up with like IDE as a service. So that's integral to Codespaces too, right?
It is, yeah. So the VS Code team, who's obviously building a fantastic product, they cut a lot of they kind of blazed the trail here in a lot of ways. So what you're talking about, Simon, is they kind of did this move to take VS Code architecturally and split it into two. So you still run VS Code on your local machine, but all of the kind of what you would think of as back-end services of VS Code, the things that you don't see, like the language server that's running, the compiler, the debugger, all of that kind of stuff, they separated that out so you could run that core compute, all the core stuff that you use your RAM and CPU on when you're doing development, and put it on another box. And whether that other box is just within a container or WSL or over connected to another machine over SSH in the cloud, that allowed people to do remote development. And that opens up a bunch of scenarios, particularly kind of in highly regulated companies or companies with huge code bases, right? Like Facebook follows a similar pattern to this, where the developers are not running Facebook on their local machine. They're checking out some server that's running in Facebook, and that's where they do their development on, and they just kind of have a remote connection to that thing. So it started to enable scenarios like that. And so what we did with Codespaces is we effectively built a SaaS service around that technology, where you could go and use the SSH extension, and I highly recommend that if that is something that works well for you. But if you do that, you still kind of have to manage, like, what does the setup of that box look like, right? What do I need to have installed on it? How do I set up that environment? How do I manage the costs of that machine? It could be a physical machine that you're running somewhere, or a VM in the cloud somewhere, starting it, stopping it, all of those kinds of things you have to worry about. You get the great benefits of remote development, but you have to worry about those things. And so with Codespaces, we wanted to take it one step farther and say, hey, you know what? We'll just handle all of that for you. So when I mentioned you click a button and 30 seconds later you're in an environment, in the background, we're spinning up a VM, we're getting it configured for you, we're managing the connection. Oh, and by the way, if you walk away from VSCode for a meeting, we'll automatically suspend that VM, so you're not paying for it, and you won't lose your work either. So we 100% build on top of that technology, and then to kind of extend it further to build this service.
So my question around it was, like, was that planned? Like, was there somebody out there who saw this thing 5 years out and was like, oh, if we split this, then we can change the way that people work by introducing this thing that I'm going to call Codespaces?
I think that that was not the name of it originally. It was Visual Studio Online. So nope, we didn't plan it 5 years out. No, it's interesting. There is always waves of research going on into what could be next. And then there's rationalizing that with where are we right now and where do we think we're going to be, right? And taking very calculated bets, right? So, I can't say that there was this intricate master plan that we know in 5 years this is where we're going to be, but there were a bunch of different bets, some of which kind of panned out, some of them didn't. Another kind of really key part of this whole story is Visual Studio Live Share, which, if you haven't seen Live Share, it's a free extension that you can install in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, and it allows, for example, me to say, hey, David, I need some help on something, and invite him literally into my machine. So you can kind of think of it as, like, I could maybe do that over Skype. I'd call him and share my screen, right? But then David's sitting there saying, oh no, can you open up that other file? Can you open up index? No. Now let me go see what you have in foo. Scroll down. No, line 73. Okay, right here, type this. No. After the colon, type that, right? And you've been there. It's a bit of a pain. So Live Share kind of solves that problem by letting David use his editor of choice to interact with code on my machine and using my compute. So if I'm asking him to come help me out on a Java project and he doesn't have Java installed on his machine, that's fine. He can just use Visual Studio Code, connect to my machine, do the compilation on my machine, things like that.
It adds some incredible features too, like that. Just like there's a lot of really great peripheral things that didn't need to be there, but they make the experience so much more magical. Anything from like being able to follow someone else's cursor to working separately to even getting co-credit on a commit and things like that are just part of it. It's a really sweet tool.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
Did you see these code stories that somebody was just putting out? I think he just got funding or something for it. So the idea is that, like, it's basically like a live share, but it's recorded, and then it's just like a 1 minute chunk, and you can do like social coding. So you like log in the morning, you can go and watch somebody code for 1 minute.
Yeah, I saw that. The creator of that put up a very interesting YouTube video that I watched the other day because he sold the extension for $9,000. And he was very excited about that, but he was dealing with a lot of abuse problems, people kind of flooding, because it was originally GIFs was how you would do the recording, and so he was getting a lot of not safe for work content showing up there, and I think that it was a little bit more than he wanted to deal with. Yeah, I've seen that. But what ended up happening, right? So we knew that pair programming and code reviews was going to be a key use case for live share. We had a lot of signal in our research to indicate that. But we also found this kind of odd use case where people would be at work, and at 5 o'clock they'd start a live share session. Sally sells seashells by the seashore with live share sessions. They would start up their live share session at 5 o'clock, take the link that I would normally send to a coworker to invite them into the session, and they would email it to their personal email, go home, get on their personal machine, and connect into their work machine and continue to work into the night. Right. And so when we start to dig into that scenario, like, why would you do a live share with yourself? And it's like, well, I don't really care about having two people. I care about being able to access that remote machine that's configured exactly the way that I need it to be. I don't want to go home and configure my personal machine to look like my work machine, or maybe you can't even, right, because of compliance reasons. So that kind of started to be like, oh, okay, there is a bunch of signal here for having a managed service. And then when we have the technology, like what we did with VSCode, you kind of start to build the blocks together to make a bigger story.
Nice. Yeah, I'm really excited about that. So that started off as a Visual Studio sort of project, and then it ended up falling into Git's hands after the acquisition. So how did that come to pass? Were Git working on something similar, or GitHub working on something similar at the same time, or was it just that it was felt that was a better place for it?
I think that when we so just a little context for people who don't know. So when we originally released the preview, we're still in preview of Codespaces. It was as a Visual Studio branded Azure service. And what we found is that a lot of our users were using it against GitHub, right? And so the flow would be the name before Codespaces was Visual Studio Online. You'd go to online.visualstudio.com. The first thing you'd be greeted with was like, paste in the URL of your repository. And then the user would open up a new tab. They'd navigate to their GitHub repository. They'd copy that URL. They'd go back to our tab, paste that thing in, rinse and repeat, right? And so even just the getting started experience was not optimal. And then when we started talking to developers, so much of the usage was in GitHub that it just became clear, like, we should have a more integrated experience. So instead of this copy and paste, you got your code over here, you got your code space over there where you're working on it. Let's just bring these things together, right? And so with the acquisition, it gave us the ability to kind of do that kind of a thing. And so we partner very closely with the GitHub team. I'm on the phone with them every single day, working through this. We have engineers working on it. They have engineers working on it. And so it's been a really great collaboration.
So you are still with Microsoft, and you are collaborating with the GitHub folks, and so payroll's still over there, even though it's still, I guess it's the same. But is that going to stay inside of Microsoft then, or is it like where's it going to land as a product? Who's the owner?
Ownership is a very interesting question, right? Like, so the dev team that built Codespaces to begin with is still largely the dev team that works on it, right? We have our partners in GitHub who also contribute to it now as well. That's one of those kind of above my pay grade conversations that folks like Nat Friedman, who's the CEO of GitHub, and my CVP, Julia Lewison, and Scott Guthrie, they kind of figure all of that stuff out. As of right now, we're not worried about ownership. We're worried about delivering value, right? And we're still in preview. We want to get this into as many people's hands as possible. And we want to build something that just changes the way that development is fundamentally done, that we're never thinking about setup and collaboration again, because it's a button click and those things go away, and we can just focus on delivering so that the end users, right, our customers, the developers, are delivering value to their customers.
I love that the small, unambitious goals of just changing everything. That's really good.
Just change it all. Just change it all.
Well, seems like a really good time to have come up with remote tools for people. And nobody's in offices anymore, so having this sort of collaboration is really handy.
Yeah, so I've been a remote employee my entire career at Microsoft, my entire time that I was at RedGate. So when I left App Insights to go work on Codespaces, it was largely because as a remote employee, I knew the value of these kinds of tools, and I wanted to be a part of fixing that, because once again, it's scratching my own itch, right? And so there was several people on the team who were kind of full-time remote, working on the product and using their kind of knowledge of that space before the pandemic. But yeah, now with the pandemic, there is this unfortunate natural wave of interest that we can ride. I think we'd prefer to not have to deal with that, obviously, but yeah, there certainly is a bunch of questions around remote and how to do it, and Codespaces is certainly a solution to a lot of people's problems.
Yeah, it's a conversation that I have around here quite a bit, that like, what if this pandemic had happened 15 years ago? Like,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have had these tools, people wouldn't be video chatting, people would still be being in offices.
Have you guys ever tried to do like a large repo checkout from like Visual Studio?
share.
Like, yeah, or shoot, Team Foundation server or whatever. It's just like it's like it was not easy, right? Plus, everybody was checking it in binaries, and it was before all the work that that you've been a part of with Nick.
Yeah. The world has certainly changed.
So, do you have a crystal ball with you? I saw maybe the fidget spinner you've got, you could use that, but what's the road ahead look like, to use the famous words of Bill Gates there? What's exciting for you? What are you looking forward to in the next 10 years?
Oh wow, in 10 years.
Yeah, it's just a small question.
Yeah, you guys just keep on pushing boundaries, right? It's like, what was the 5-year master plan? What is the 10-year plan?
Watch
10
it, Nick.
years.
We're gonna start asking you about things 11 years out.
I know.
And holding you to them.
I mean, I guess goal number 1 for the next 10 years, don't die. That's pretty high on my list.
Jeez, I'm telling you, Nick, work on smaller goals.
Like I said, my work is a part of who I am, but it's not my core priority. So my immediate thought is not it's not the one for the audience. It's seeing my daughter grow up well, right? Having my marriage continue to be the amazing thing that it is. These are the things that my mind goes to first. Continuing to have relationships with folks like you. All right, fluffy stuff out of the way.
Aww.
My goal for the next 10 years, I'm super focused on this kind of virtualized development space right now. I don't know if in 10 years I'll still be that excited about it, right? But for the next 2, 3, 4 years, that's certainly going to be where all of my kind of development thinking is going. So Codespaces, my team also owns a couple of other services that are kind of related in concept in terms of moving kind of workloads up into the cloud. So my team works on a service called Lab Services, which is taking the computer lab that you might have known and loved from your university days and moving that up into the cloud, which also is getting a lot of interest because of COVID, as well as kind of all of the rest of the stuff that you might need to kind of test an application before it goes into production. So, maybe spin up like a staging environment or a pre-production environment or a load testing environment, and managing those things well. I'm kind of thinking through all of that kind of stuff and the implications that it has as more and more development is moving into the cloud, and as DevOps matures, what are kind of the next steps. So those are some of the big things that I'm thinking about. I've always been envious of James and his wife going and opening up the bakery. So, my project that I was working on before Glimpse came out was a cookbook, and I have not touched it in almost 10 years because I've been on this wild ride that Glimpse was the initial spark for. But I'm really hoping to get back into publishing code. I've been reading a bunch during COVID. I've got like a couple here. I got a few more over there on my desk.
Well, if you're looking for a recipe for a really killer cookie sandwich, then I probably have an entry for you.
Yeah, you need to send that thing over.
You can license it from James.
It was MIT. I'm pretty sure it's MIT. Right? So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
Cool. Well, thank you very much today, Nick. It's really good catching up with you again. It's been far too long since we've been in the same room together. This is the next best thing. Really enjoyed hearing about some of that kind of background around Codespaces. And, to me, it kind of sounds like sometimes for us looking from the outside in, we get that feeling that someone or a group of people at Microsoft have like this vision of this is what we're going to build and this is the way it's going to work out. But hearing that background, there's that vision and those ideas, like you said, kind of those bets that you make. But it sounds like a lot of where things end up is a result of seeing how people use the things that you put out there, right? So it's really the same as every other piece of software that we build, just at a larger scale. But seeing how people use it and then reacting to that and taking it to the next step. So it's really cool to hear.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, there certainly are times that Microsoft has done a bit more of like hey, this is the vision, this is what we're going to build. And some of those have been massively successful, and some of them have been huge flops, right? But just kind of trying to be agile and lean and make sure that we're learning from the customer, not telling the customer what they should be doing, is really just kind of a whole mindset shift that we're really embracing, like especially in my team and my division. That's something that we never want to make the mistake again where we ship a thing and people are like, why would I ever use this, right? We want people to be like, I need this, and we know that because they told us, and we're giving them exactly what they need to make them successful.
That's super cool.
I'm sad that we won't see another Microsoft Bob, though.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think the source code for that is available, so you can run with it if you want. I guess I would be remiss, since we're wrapping up, to also not call out that if you, dear listener, I hope you're listening, because if you're viewing all of this right now, I apologize, especially for James. Sorry, I had to get a shot in there because he's such a good sport, such a good guy.
I was surprised it took this long, actually.
I was on my best behavior. It's 200th episode, like let's revel in the moment. So no, if you're interested in Codespaces, you can go just do a search for GitHub Codespaces. You'll find the access form to sign up. It's in beta right now. So you'll sign up, and we're kind of working through the queue to give people access as soon as we can. But we would love for you to try it and give us feedback, and you can hit us up on Twitter or on the GitHub community forums.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thanks again for joining us. And for our viewers, listeners out there, remember to like, comment, and share, and we'll see everybody on the next episode.
Awesome.
Bye.
Cheers.